The polished wood of the conference table felt cold beneath my fingertips. It was the same table my grandfather had brought into this building decades ago, heavy with history, scarred by time, solid and dependable. It was the heart of the place, the anchor, or so I thought. The air in the room was thick, not with the usual scent of brewing coffee and old paper, but with something sharp, metallic, like fear or maybe just the tang of ozone before a storm. I watched him across the table, the man I'd built a life with, the man who now looked like a stranger in his own skin. His eyes darted, avoiding mine, fixed on the screen in front of him, a screen displaying a name that was not mine. Not anymore. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. This building, this business, it wasn't just bricks and mortar, not just ledgers and contracts. It was a legacy. My grandfather started it from nothing, a small print shop in a time before everything went digital. He built it with his hands, with sweat and late nights, with a handshake that meant something. He passed it to my father, who grew it, modernized it, gave it a name that was known and respected throughout the city. My name. The name on the sign outside, the name on the letterhead, the name that carried the weight of generations. It was in my blood, in my bones. It was who I was. When I met him, he was a whirlwind of ambition and charm. Smart, driven, saw potential where others didn't. He wasn't from this world, not the world of quiet legacy and slow growth. He was fast, electric. We fell in love hard and fast. He respected the history, or so he said. He admired what my family had built. He fit seamlessly into the rhythm of the business, brought in new ideas, new clients, energy I hadn't even realized we were missing. He worked side by side with me, with my father in his later years. We were a unit, a team. When my father retired, it was natural, expected, that we would take over together. We put our lives into it. Long days, longer nights. Sacrifices we made willingly for the dream we shared. We rebranded slightly, a modern twist on the old name. His ideas, mostly, and I went along with them. It was still our name, my family's name, just with a sleeker font, a more contemporary logo. We built new departments, expanded our services. We were good together. Complementary. I handled the core operations, the client relationships built over decades, the quiet stability. He chased the new markets, the big deals, the future. We talked about our retirement, about passing it on to hypothetical children, keeping the legacy alive. It wasn't just a business. It was our life, our partnership, our future, wrapped up in this building, under this name. The first cracks appeared subtly. He started taking more meetings without me. Conversations would stop when I entered the room. Small things easily dismissed as him just taking initiative, needing focus. He became secretive about certain deals, certain finances. He said it was just streamlining, efficiency. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, my partner in life and in business. We shared a bed, a home, a future. We shared everything. Then came the official letter. A legal notice, delivered by a bland man in a sharp suit who looked uncomfortable holding the envelope like it might bite him. It was from our own legal team, but signed off by him. A formal announcement of a corporate restructuring. Deep in the jargon, buried under clauses and subclauses, was the line that stopped my heart. A change to the corporate name. It wasn't a slight modification, not a simple rebrand. It was the complete removal of my family name, replaced by a generic, modern, meaningless moniker. Something that sounded like every other faceless corporation. Something that was just his. My hands shook holding the paper. The words swam. It felt like a physical blow, like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out something vital. This wasn't just changing a sign. This was erasing history. Erasing me. Erasing my family. Everything we had built, everything I was, suddenly reduced to a footnote, a discarded relic. I confronted him, the letter clutched in my hand, my voice trembling somewhere between rage and disbelief. He was calm, too calm. He said it was necessary for growth, for attracting new investors, for shedding the old-fashioned image tied to a family name. He said it was business, not personal. Business, not personal. As if this business wasn't the most personal thing in the world to me. As if our marriage wasn't supposed to be a partnership, a conversation, a shared path. He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly cold, unfamiliar. The charm was gone, replaced by a hard, calculating glint I'd never seen directed at me before. He dismissed my feelings as emotional, sentimental.
Said I was holding on to the past.
The past he was systematically dismantling. The days that followed were a blur of disbelief and pain. Walking into the office felt alien. The familiar space was tainted. The employees, many of whom had been with us for years, shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say, who to look at. The air was thick with unspoken tension. He acted as if nothing had changed, but everything had. He was more distant, more controlling. He started making decisions without consulting me, freezing me out of meetings, limiting my access to certain information. He was systematically cutting me off, piece by piece, from the business that was my heritage. I felt lost, adrift. This wasn't just a professional disagreement. It was a betrayal that went to the core of our marriage, our shared life. It felt like he had taken a wrecking ball to the foundation of everything we were. I tried talking to him again, pleading, reasoning. I reminded him of the early days, of the promises we made, of the dream we shared. He listened, but his eyes were vacant. He had already moved on. He was already calculating the next step. He saw the business not as a legacy to be nurtured, but as an asset to be exploited, a stepping stone to something else. And I, with my history and my sentimentality, was just an obstacle. He started bringing in outside consultants, men and women in sharp suits who spoke a language of mergers and acquisitions, of market value and exit strategies. They walked through the halls like vultures, appraising everything, reducing a lifetime of work to numbers on a spreadsheet. I heard whispers, rumors that he was looking to sell. Not just selling a part, but the whole thing. Selling the building, the name, the legacy. Selling my history. Selling me out. Panic set in. A cold, visceral fear that tightened in my chest and made it hard to breathe. I saw the trap. He was cutting me off, diminishing my role, making me look like I was no longer essential so that when he sold, he could claim it was solely his doing, solely his asset. He was preparing to walk away with everything, leaving me with nothing but the wreckage of our marriage and the ghost of my family's legacy. I felt powerless. Every door I tried to open seemed to slam shut. The legal structure he had put in place was solid, designed to give him control. He had been planning this for a while, meticulously, quietly, while I was still living in the happy illusion of our partnership. He had poisoned the well, turned my own business into a cage. The thought of losing it all, of seeing my grandfather's legacy erased, sold off to some faceless corporation, was unbearable. It felt like a second death for my father, for my grandfather, for everyone who had poured their lives into this place. It felt like the end of me. I remember one sleepless night, staring at the ceiling in the house we shared, the house that suddenly felt too large, too empty. I was replaying every conversation, every look, every subtle shift in his behavior over the past months, maybe even years. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The secret meetings, the hushed phone calls, the sudden interest in my family's history, not out of respect, but out of a need to understand the foundation he planned to dismantle. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He had been using me, waiting for the right moment to take what he wanted. The betrayal cut so deep it felt like a physical wound that would never heal. But somewhere in the darkness, beneath the layers of hurt and fear, a spark ignited. A cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my family. This was about legacy. This was about fighting for what was rightfully ours, what was rightfully mine. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him erase everything. I stopped thinking like a hurt wife and started thinking like the child of the people who had built this place brick by brick, deal by deal. I started thinking like a survivor. I stopped trying to reason with him. I stopped showing my pain. I put on a mask of weary acceptance. I attended the few meetings I was still allowed and listened, observed. I became a ghost in my own company, watching the vultures circle, listening to their jargon, listening to his confident pronouncements about the future, a future that didn't include me. But while I was a ghost, I was also a spy. I paid attention to everything. The names of the consultants, the brokers he was talking to, the potential buyers. I memorized dates, deadlines, figures. I started piecing together the puzzle of his plan. I knew I couldn't fight him head-on in the way he expected. He had stacked the legal deck, he controlled the information flow, he had isolated me. Fighting him in the open would be a losing battle. I needed a different strategy. I needed to find a weakness, a blind spot, something he had overlooked in his arrogance and his meticulous planning. I needed to use his own momentum against him. I started digging, not into the current paperwork he controlled, but into the past. Into the original documents, the founding agreements, the papers my grandfather and father had drafted. I spent hours in the dusty archives of the building, sifting through boxes of old files, breathing in the scent of aged paper and forgotten dreams. I looked for anything, any clause, any detail, any historical context that might give me leverage. It was painstaking work, tedious, and often demoralizing. Most of it was just confirming how thoroughly he had boxed me in with the new structure. Doubt gnawed at me constantly. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was clinging to a past that no longer mattered. Maybe it was already lost. Then I found it. Buried deep within a supplementary agreement from decades ago, an addendum signed during a small early expansion. A clause that seemed insignificant at the time, put in place by my cautious grandfather. It wasn't about ownership percentages or management structure. It was about the land itself. The building sat on land that had been in my family for even longer than the business. The clause stipulated that while the business could operate from the premises under certain conditions, the underlying land ownership remained separate and held certain rights, including a veto over the sale of the business, if that sale would fundamentally alter the use or ownership structure of the land parcel. It was a technicality, a relic of a different era of handshake deals and local roots, something easily overlooked in the modern world of corporate finance. Something he had overlooked. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was tiny, almost invisible, but it was a thread I could pull on. It was leverage tied not to the business entity he had restructured, but to the physical ground it stood on, ground he had never bothered to put into the new corporate structure because the business operating agreement seemed sufficient. He had focused on the paper, the corporate veil, the numbers. He had forgotten the earth beneath his feet. He had forgotten where it all came from. The realization solidified my resolve. This was my way in. This was my chance. My path forward was terrifyingly narrow and required absolute precision, perfect timing, and a level of coldness I didn't know if I possessed. I had to pretend to be defeated, to let him think he was winning, while I quietly, secretly, prepared my move. I had to let him walk right up to the edge of selling, right up to the moment of victory, and then pull the ground out from under him. I contacted a lawyer, not our usual firm who were now compromised by his control, but an old family friend, someone discreet and sharp. I explained the situation, the betrayal, the clause. He was cautious, said it was a long shot, that the clause might be contestable, outdated. But he saw the potential leverage. He saw the fight in my eyes. We worked in secret. We drafted papers, prepared filings, built a legal argument based on that single, forgotten clause. It was like building a bomb, piece by piece in the dark. Every step felt fraught with peril. What if he found out? What if the clause didn't hold up? What if I was wrong? The tension at home was unbearable. We lived like polite strangers. He was consumed by his plans, his calls with buyers, his spreadsheets. He barely looked at me. He talked about his future, the money he would make from the sale, the freedom it would give him. He was already living that life in his head, a life without me, without the legacy, just profit. I smiled, nodded, said little. I was the dutiful, slightly sad wife, accepting her fate. Inside, I was a coiled spring, counting down the moments, rehearsing my lines, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The coldness I needed settled over me, a protective layer of ice. The hurt was still there, a dull ache, but it was buried deep beneath determination. The day arrived like any other. Except it wasn't. It was the day of the final meeting. The meeting where he would finalize the sale. He had gathered the key players, the primary buyer, their legal team, his consultants, his lawyers, and me. A formality, he had said to me, just to sign the last papers. He looked triumphant, expansive. He was already mentally counting the money. The air in the conference room was charged, thick with anticipation, but from his side, it was celebratory. From my side, it was the silence before a storm. He began to speak, his voice confident, booming, outlining the terms of the sale, the successful negotiations, the bright future for the company under its new ownership, stripped of its history, its name, its soul. He talked about growth, about synergy, about maximizing value. He spoke as if I wasn't there, as if my family's entire history in that building, in that business, was just a quaint prelude to his grand transaction. The buyers nodded, their faces impassive, focused on the numbers. His lawyers looked satisfied. Everything was going exactly according to his plan. He reached the point where he needed my signature. A mere formality, he repeated, a spousal consent form to acknowledge the sale of an asset acquired during the marriage. He pushed the document across the table, along with a pen. His eyes met mine for the first time all morning, a fleeting look of smug pity. He thought he had won. He thought I was just here to sign on the dotted line and disappear quietly. I didn't pick up the pen. I looked him dead in the eye, and the coldness I had cultivated finally solidified into something sharp, something cutting. The silence in the room stretched, growing heavy, uncomfortable. He shifted, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Just sign it," he prompted, his voice losing a fraction of its earlier confidence. "I can't," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, but it cut through the air like glass. His smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" "It's a formality." "It's not a formality," I repeated. "Because the business, as you intend to sell it, is not entirely yours to sell." The buyer stirred. His lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. He laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Don't be ridiculous. All the paperwork is in order. You signed the restructuring documents yourself." "I signed the corporate restructuring documents," I agreed, "which pertain to the business entity. But the business entity operates from this location. And this location," I gestured around the room at the polished table, the solid walls, "this land, is subject to a different agreement." I opened the briefcase I had brought, not with my signature, but with a thick file. I slid a document across the table, positioning it directly in front of him. It was a copy of the old addendum, highlighted, marked, accompanied by recent legal filings. Section 3B of the 1978 Supplementary Land Use Agreement, I said, my voice still quiet, dangerously calm. It stipulates that the underlying landowner retains veto power over any sale of the business that fundamentally alters the use or ownership structure of the land parcel. His eyes scanned the document, his brow furrowed in confusion. He hadn't seen this. He hadn't considered the land ownership, hadn't dug back far enough, hadn't seen past the shiny new corporate structure. He had been so focused on the business entity, he'd forgotten the very ground it stood on. The ground my family had owned for generations before he ever arrived. That's outdated," he stammered. "That clause is irrelevant." "My lawyer disagrees," I said, and my lawyer, the family friend, who was sitting silently beside me, nodded curtly. "And a judge agreed last week. We filed an injunction. The sale is blocked." His face went pale. He looked from the document to me, his eyes wide with shock, then rapidly filling with a terrifying rage. You did this." "I did," I confirmed. "You tried to erase me. You tried to steal my family's legacy. You forgot that the legacy isn't just in the name on the sign, it's in the very ground this building stands on. And I own the ground." The buyer's lawyer spoke up, his voice sharp. "If the land use is restricted, This fundamentally changes the terms of the acquisition. We understood this was a clean sale of the business entity, assets, and operations, including unrestricted use of premises. It would have been, I said, looking not at them but at him, if he hadn't tried to do it behind my back by erasing me. He lunged across the table, a strangled sound of fury escaping his throat. My lawyer reacted instantly, putting a hand up, a silent warning. Security, who had been alerted by my lawyer to be outside the room just in case, appeared at the door. He froze halfway across the table, his face contorted, pure disbelief warring with venomous anger. He had been so sure of his victory, so confident in his control, he had walked right into a trap he hadn't even seen being built. "You stupid, sentimental woman," he hissed, the veneer of charm completely gone. "You've ruined everything." "No," I said, standing up slowly, my gaze unwavering. "You ruined everything. You ruined us. You tried to take what wasn't yours. And now you have nothing." I wasn't just blocking the sale because of the land clause. The injunction gave me leverage, but my real move came next. Using the same legal mechanism, the same forgotten agreements that tied the business's operation to the land, coupled with his attempt to sell the business out from under a co-owner who held rights tied to the premises, my lawyer had simultaneously initiated a process to revert the business's operational structure back to a model where the landowner's rights were paramount. It was complicated, layered in decades of corporate law and family agreements, but the core was simple. He had tried to sell the business as a standalone entity, ignoring its deep, legally binding roots to the land. Because he had attempted this unauthorized, obstructed sale that violated the land agreement, it triggered a clause allowing the landowner, me, to dissolve the existing operational agreement and propose a new one, effectively restructuring the business again, but this time, cutting out the partner who had attempted the sale in violation of the premises terms. It wasn't just blocking the sale, it was seizing control based on his attempted betrayal. "The injunction doesn't just stop the sale," I continued, my voice picking up a quiet strength. "It creates grounds for a forced restructuring of the business entity based on breach of the land use agreement triggered by your attempted sale. The court has granted an interim order. Your control over the business. It's over." His face crumpled. It wasn't just the sale collapsing. It was the realization that his meticulous plan, his carefully constructed edifice of betrayal, had imploded, and I had been the one to light the fuse. He hadn't just lost the money from the sale, he had lost the business itself. The look in his eyes shifted from rage to utter devastation. He had underestimated me completely, had seen me only as an emotional obstacle, not as someone capable of strategy, of leverage, of fighting with the very history he sought to erase. He stumbled back, knocking a chair over. The papers scattered on the table. The buyers and their team began packing up, murmuring apologies, their faces a mix of awkwardness and fascination. His lawyers were speaking quickly, urgently, trying to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. But it was too late. He had overplayed his hand, blinded by greed and arrogance. He stood there, isolated, the room emptying around him, the silence returning, heavier now with the weight of his collapsed ambition. His eyes, wild and lost, finally settled on me. There was no anger left, only a raw, gaping shock, the look of a man who had just realized he was standing on a cliff edge he hadn't known was there, and the ground had just fallen away. And then he collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a shout or a cry. Just a slow, boneless crumpling, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He sank to the floor beside the overturned chair, a heap of expensive suit and broken dreams. The man who had tried to take everything, left with nothing but the cold, hard floor beneath him. I stood there for a long moment, watching him. There was no triumph, no rush of victory. Just emptiness. The business was saved, yes. My family's legacy would continue. But the cost had been immense. The man I loved, the partner I trusted, was gone, replaced by this stranger, this broken figure on the floor. The dream we had built together was shattered, irrevocably. The aftermath was a blur of legal proceedings, bitter negotiations, the unwinding of a marriage and a business partnership all at once. He fought, of course, but the legal grounds were solid. He had violated the core agreement tied to the land, and his attempt to sell was clear evidence. He walked away with nothing from the business itself, only what was legally his from the dissolution of our personal assets, which was less than he would have gained from the sale, far less than he had anticipated. His network, the consultants, the buyers, they evaporated. His reputation was damaged. He was the man who had tried to steal a legacy and lost everything. The business is mine now. Fully, unequivocally mine. The sign outside bears my family's name again, the original design restored. The old conference table feels different now, not just heavy with history, but with the weight of what happened in this room. The air is clearer, the tension gone, but a different kind of silence lingers, the quiet hum of resilience after a storm. Rebuilding hasn't been easy. There were employees who left, clients who were scared off, the sheer emotional exhaustion of the fight. But there were also those who stayed loyal to the name, to the history, to me. We are slowly, carefully, putting the pieces back together. It's a different kind of business now, marked by the scar of the betrayal, tempered by the fire of the fight. It's stronger, perhaps more rooted, certainly. Sometimes, I walk through the quiet offices late at night, the only sound my footsteps on the familiar floors. I think about my grandfather, my father, about the life they poured into this place. And I think about him, the man I loved who almost destroyed it all. There's a deep sadness that will probably never fully disappear, a reminder of the vulnerability that comes with trust. But beneath the sadness is something else, a quiet strength, a fierce protectiveness for this legacy, and a hard-earned knowledge that sometimes the greatest defense is built on the foundations others overlook. He looked up at the sky, chasing paper fortunes. I remembered the earth. And the earth held me. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.